This video is looking at internal versus external rotation of the trail leg. So we had a question about the transition movement of the trail leg. Basically, there are two different patterns, and we'll take a look at a couple examples at the end of this video. But two different patterns. One would be seeing kind of this look of what looks like external rotation, where the knee stays pointed a little bit more at the golf ball as the belt buckle turns away and the pelvis kind of rotates. Or two, where the pelvis and the knee kind of rotate together, and it almost looks like internal rotation, but it's probably more of just the femur staying in the same relative position to the pelvis as the pelvis rotates. So you'll see these two different patterns, and the question was basically, what's the deal, right? Why are there these two different patterns, and what do you need to look out for with each of them? So the basic answer is that there's these two different patterns arise from where my weight is distributed, what muscles I'm using, and whether I'm more on my left side or my right side. So you can experiment, you can kind of feel these two different movements if you stand up out of your chair. So the external rotation would be if I do kind of that trail leg push, where I'm going to basically rotate my foot outward and slightly behind me. That trail leg push will tend to create more of that look of that external rotation. That's also a lot easier if I keep my upper body or keep my pressure more through this right foot. If I get all my weight onto this left foot, it's very hard to kind of create any pelvis rotation while just doing that trail leg push. The last piece would be if I stay in my heels, it'll be a lot easier for me to push through that leg in this external rotation fashion. So the opposite is going to lead towards more of this internal rotation fashion. To feel what that's like, get more into your toes, get more into this lead foot, and then basically use kind of the quad to push against the ground and kind of pivot like so, where I'm basically pushing with just the tip of my foot using this quad and the kind of inner thigh muscle on my left leg to rotate my belt buckle and my pelvis. So one is a little bit more of a trail leg and more towards the heel, and the opposite is more of a toe and lead leg. So what you'll frequently see is you'll typically see a little bit more of this trail leg push when we're looking at the driver, and then you'll frequently see more exaggerations on this lead leg when you're looking at the iron. Not everyone will demonstrate the lead leg pattern, but you'll tend to see it in juniors and females, especially those who hit the ball a long way for their relative size. So guys like Rory McIlroy, Jamie Sedlowski, tend to have a little bit of this internal rotation pattern. And basically what's happening is in order to really spike that lead foot, in order to create a lot of vertical pressure so that they can create friction so that they can rotate their lower body, they're going to really get into that front leg. And then once they're in that front leg, they can use that quad to kind of help them rotate. As opposed, you'll tend to see a little bit heavier golfers, and you'll tend to see golfers with a little bit more muscle mass using a little bit more of that trail leg push. So the question becomes, what do I do about it? I don't think this is one that you necessarily want to try to coach out of a young junior. You want to train it out of it in the gym or with posture work, because what can happen, the major red flag, is if you get too much into your toes, your pelvis will tend to shift forward, and when you do this movement, you'll be using a little bit more of your QL muscle, or one of the muscles in your back. And so it can potentially really cause some lumbar instability or potentially even some lower back pain. At the very least, it can cause that upper body to get a little bit steep in contact. So it can cause some sequencing issues when it's kind of exaggerated. So the better option is to use kind of really good pelvic stability, and especially if I'm hitting a driver, have a little bit more of this trail leg push as opposed to a little bit more of this kind of spike the front foot and kind of rotate. But again, I would make most of the corrections to that pattern through balance in the gym, because especially your young juniors and females are going to have a hard time creating enough vertical pressure while using that external rotation model until they put on enough muscle mass.
So now let's take a quick look at the two different options. So this would be option one. We'll look at two different golfers, Robert Rock here on the right. This would be kind of more of that trail leg push. And your two references that you want to look at are kind of the center of the kneecap, and the hip joint's going to be somewhere right around there. And you can look at how the foot is working as well. So you'll see that as he goes to transition, you'll see that his hip or his pelvis is rotating around. I guess a better landmark would be looking at the belt buckle as it compares to the knee. But you'll see that from the top of the swing, the belt buckle is kind of leaving behind the knee, and so it creates more of this almost straight line of push look. So then over here on the left, we have Sam Snead, a little bit slower frame rate. So we'll see a similar where he's kind of pushing through that knee, which stabilizes that knee, and you'll see his belt buckle work away from the knee. So that would be a little bit more of that trail leg push model, utilizing that right glute to rotate the pelvis away from the lead trail leg. And now we've got the second option. So we'll see typically with skinnier golfers who hit the ball a long way, you'll tend to see there's this pretty pronounced kind of drop or kind of spike into that lead leg, more so than a push from that trail leg. So you'll see during transition he's dropping into that lead leg, and as he's doing so, this knee is kind of staying with the pelvis, and as the pelvis rotates, kind of pulls the knee with it. So he's not really rotating this femur, he's not pushing through this leg to drive the pelvis that way. He's using his inner thigh, he's using his right quad, but he's not really using the hip rotators to drive the pelvis. So here's what happens when they get older. We could look at Jamie Sedlowski or Rory McIlroy, and you'll see that it's a little bit more of that spike that lead leg, and the knee kind of comes a little bit more with it, rotates with the pelvis. Now, one of the interesting ones is we'll take a look at Belen Motha, and you'll see that she does a little bit more of that trail leg push with her driver than she does with her iron. Okay, so I wasn't able to find a good face on iron, but you can see here with kind of a hybrid, you'll see that knee start working with the pelvis as she kind of really gets into that left side, gets into that lead side. Where over here on the right, you'll see that as she stays a little bit more behind the ball, her pressure is kind of going through that trail leg, not quite as much into that front foot. You'll see she doesn't have quite the same amount of that lead leg drifting in with it. So these are subtle differences, but you'll see the overall pattern is when you have a very light golfer trying to create speed, they're going to have to use more of that vertical pressure, and so they'll tend to have more of that lead leg driven push and rotation, so the trail leg will just kind of come with it, where if you're a little bit stockier or if you have a little more mass to you, you don't have to spike the vertical pressure quite as much. So if you see someone who has this look of with the tremendous vertical pressure and look of internal rotation, I think it's something that you train in the gym, and as they get stronger, I don't think it's necessarily something you coach out of them. You'd want to coach more of the ab conditioning, glute conditioning, so that the pelvis can work in a really strong fashion, and the lower body mechanics, as you've seen with Jamie Sedlowski, or if we looked at with Rory McIlroy, you'd see can still work at a very high level. You just have to be careful about the tendencies that come up with any of these movement patterns.